Hi guys, just gone midday here in London, Wednesday 1st of May. Just going to have a quick look over the calendar for the remainder of the sessions here, and then some charts at some key levels. It's gone through the morning, Labour Day in mainland Europe, so relatively quiet as expected. Not really until just over an hour's time in the US, where we have ADP, which will be worth keeping an eye on ahead of non-farm payrolls on Friday. Also got some data out at 3 o'clock, construction spending in ISM manufacturing, although with the Fed later, the FOMC meeting, it would take a lot for these data releases to really move the market. Oil 330, we'll come onto the chart in a moment, but that'll be something to keep an eye on as usual in its usual slot on Wednesday, before we have the Fed release at 7 and then press conference 7:30 UK time. A couple of earnings to come out. Mostly the big ones have been done now. We saw, well, certainly in the tech sector yesterday, a nice recovery, as you can see here, Alphabet and then Apple, pretty much back to exactly where we were. For this market, I would have the trend line on from that all-time high, and if we can get back above there, you've got to imagine price could have another go and extend its legs, if you like, to get a test of that level that we had back on the 25th. The key level to the downside, pivot would be somewhere I'd be focusing on, was also the high of yesterday around 1 o'clock, before we had the push just past the close yesterday at 9 o'clock. 9:30 as we continue to push on. Similar for the Dow in looking potentially at a level above where we're trading to break to have a further push higher. You can see the high of the year tested 3 times, the last test of those being early this morning. A break of that, you could expect to potentially see a further push on, and next thing you know, we're above the high of the year, and then looking to extend back towards its all-time high, which is still over 1% away. And the 27,000 on the futures would be maybe a more medium-term target, but we're worth keeping an eye on. If we can get above that yearly high, the push to the all-time high could come quite quickly. Talking of oil earlier, with the data release out at 3:30, some key levels to be aware of this morning, finding good support on this trend line that formed over the last couple of days, and that again, despite a false breakout, held pretty well. Got a zone marked up here from the low from last night to an area which broke down between, on the futures anyway, around 63, 67 and 73 to the top, and as a zone so far it's held pretty well, and that would be another level even around the DOE that I'd still have marked up regardless of what happens here, due to the previous price action acting quite well. Also to the upside, should we get there above the pivot and the $64 handle, 64.14, the afternoon high or the evening high from yesterday, before the API came out as well, that would be somewhere to focus on. If we were to have a bearish release and perhaps continue this Friday or the end of last week trend to the downside, despite the recovery yesterday, I'll be keeping an eye on today's S1 area and $63 handle, which could come in at a potential third test of this trend line. So remains to be seen what happens for oil, but it's setting up quite nicely. Euro, a couple of areas to be aware of course, the ADP and the numbers out at 3 p.m. UK time, the resistance level above, while it seems relatively far away now with those numbers and the FOMC later, it wouldn't be too surprising to see either one of these extremities or above going back to the higher, the 22nd, come into play. But if we were to have a hawkish reaction, I'll be keeping an eye on this trend line, which you can see acted really well as a level support after that breakthrough, and potentially that could mark up near the current lows of the morning session later on. And if we were to get a break below that, you'd imagine there could be a decent push lower. But yeah, just going back to the calendar, which should start to get a bit more interesting as we go into the back end of the session after a relatively quiet day.